What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long, long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone, and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
Our guest on this episode of Educate Everyone is Phalana Tiller. She's the vice president of Bendable Labs, a social purpose corporation dedicated to improving the economic welfare of individuals across the United States. Phalana leads the Harbor Freight Leadership Lab, a program designed to strengthen K-12 skilled trades education by honing the skills of emerging leaders. She's passionate about cultivating empathy and agency in learners of all ages. Now here's Phalana Tiller and Dr. Joe Atman.
Phalana, thank you so much for being here with us. Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. It's my pleasure, Joe. I'm happy to be here. I am the vice president of a small social purpose corporation called Bendable Labs. And we're based here in Southern California, but we work across the country. And I'm based on the eastern edge of LA County, but I get to schlep all over the country and meet really interesting, fabulous people thanks to this interesting work that I get to do, which is at the intersection of lifelong learning and workforce development. So we have a number of programs in different ways that intersection comes to life. And I never get bored. I have really a super dynamic portfolio and really interesting teammates and really interesting clients. So I feel like in some ways I've won the career lotto. I get to live out some of my strengths and capabilities through this work. And most importantly to me, I get to learn a lot. I'm constantly learning something new or being challenged by something that piques my curiosities and then instigates some new learning. So that's what I'm up to now. This role and this career moment kind of comes after a number of years at a social enterprise at a university here in Southern California. And prior to that, I was a classroom instructor. And prior to that, I've had a career in the entertainment business. I worked in film, theater, and television for a number of years, all the while with a hand in education through curriculum design and or consulting. So to some degree or another, I've either been an educator in the classroom or someone who's using my body as an instrument for education and information exchange through theater and performance, or now working in this other space that is not necessarily within the classroom walls, but touching the aspects of learning that all of us have to do in life. Yeah, I think that's who I am. So that's what I'm up to.
Yeah, perfect. Great. That works. Yeah. How did you get hooked up with Bendable Labs? And I think we need to hear more about exactly what it is that Bendable Labs do precisely.
Yeah. So Bendable Labs launched actually in January of 2023. So we're relatively new. We're just in our third year now. And we are a relatively small team. And the core of our team actually worked together. I mentioned the social enterprise that I worked at a university. That was the Drucker Institute at Claremont Graduate University. I was there for nearly 13 years. And one of my former colleagues from there, one of the programs that had been incubated at the Drucker Institute, he and another of our colleagues, the two of them as partners, were able to acquire the IP and do essentially a tech transfer to launch this company outside of that institution. And so they founded this company, and having had a long number of years working with him, and then the two of them working with him and her, the exciting opportunity of something really different from what I'd been doing for over a decade was just hard to ignore. And I asked to come on over and see if there's a way that I could contribute and be helpful. So that's how I connected with them. So we're sort of on paper look like a new team, but I've actually worked with these same folks for over 15 years. So it's just the context that's a little bit shifted and the focus that's a little bit shifted, but we're mostly longtime colleagues. That work is really interesting. So I mentioned earlier that we're at this intersection. I use a shorthand to help people, depending on how long someone wants to listen to me chat about what we do, the shorthand is this intersection of lifelong learning and workforce development.
Can you elaborate on what that means specifically and exactly?
So in some ways, we think about the ways that human beings and their lives and, just their well-being benefits from learning, whether you're learning just to get better at a hobby you're interested in, or you're learning to improve your chances in the job market. Lifelong learning has a role, whether you're in traditional kindergarten, you're in high school, you're a seasoned manager in your role, or you're maybe in your encore chapter of life and you're kind of post-career, but you don't want to be fully retired and you want to figure out some new skills or interests of your own, that there's a place for learning and there's a way to access it. And I'll talk a little bit about how we offer that to folks in kind of non-traditional spaces. And then the other part of that intersection, which I referred to as workforce development, is something a little bit more explicit, where people are actually trying to learn concrete skills that can help them in their employability, to help them be able to access opportunity for work and for remuneration. And that comes to life in a lot of different ways. And again, I'll explain that as well. But that big umbrella of the intersection of lifelong learning and workforce development means that we have a lot of room for who we engage with and how we actually bring ideas and the work to life. There are kind of three buckets that we play in. We have a research arm, and then we have a consulting arm, and we have a actual tech platform. That's the thing I was referring to. There's a program that we were able to acquire the IP out of the university around, and that platform is called Bendable. So our company's name actually comes from the product name. And Bendable itself, the product, is a system for curation. It's a digital platform that basically helps people be able to connect to the resources that they need. Oftentimes, for example, our public libraries have huge catalogs of learning resources, courses, digital classes that are actually free to library patrons with your library card. But not a lot of people know about those resources or how to access them. So essentially, we created a platform that made all of that searchable, curatable, and then kind of customizable. So for an end user who's just curious about learning, if they have a Bendable account through their public library, they could start to go in there and create their own sort of personalized catalog of online classes. And it could end up looking like your Spotify or your Netflix, but for learning resources. And all those resources, all those courses, those digital classes are coming from really high quality, reputable sources, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, CellEd. There are so many contributors to those catalogs. And essentially what we help patrons do is be able to find this stuff. Usually a public library system, if you ever go to their website, you'll notice that they'll often have a pull down menu somewhere that's about like learning or learning resources. When you click on that, you typically run into an alpha ordered list of databases. And if you're not digitally confident or even proficient, some of that just looks like listicle gobbledygook. Like you don't even know what is the difference between a class.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's hard for them to absorb meaning or relevance from those lists. And so what we've tried to do is create a system that allows you to actually compare. Oh, this one is actually a 6-week long course. My goodness, I'm not sure I want to do all that. How about a 2-hour course? Cool. I'm going to save this as one of my favorites and I'm going to come back to it. Or you have a real variety of interests and things you want to learn. Some of them are particular to getting better at something that you do at your job, Excel or the Google Suite. There's a whole way to access courses that are related to these kind of office tasks and capabilities and skills. Cool. You can access those things. Or you're just curious about being a better cook. And there's actually online cooking classes and they come from these other sources and you want to save those for yourself. So the platform itself is kind of the core entry level offering that we have. And then what that allows us to do in different contexts and with different partners across the country is sometimes it's a community-based organization or a nonprofit, a job center, a community center, a family resource center, even senior living programs where they have a set clientele or a set of constituents who come there for various services. And then that organization might have its own sort of curated set of offerings that are right for that population. If it's a parent center at a public school, they may have worked with us to kind of pre-seed, kind of set up and select content that's going to be relevant to parents. Maybe they're interested in helping their kid with algebra, so they need to bone up on algebra. Or maybe they're interested in issues of social emotional learning and they want to learn about teen development, and there's courses around that. Or perhaps that parent is doing both things that are related to parenting, but also things that are related to elevating their own employability. So maybe they also want to have courses that are about getting better at some particular software, or they want to learn coding, or they want to improve their French language skills, or I've always been curious to learn Tagalog. My neighbors are Filipino and I want to be able to speak to them. You can find all of this kind of learning inside public library catalogs. And then we make it, like I said, super accessible. But that context where that end user is coming in to interact with the platform sometimes shapes what content they see, because that community-based organization or that parent center, that whoever it is that we are partnered with, has kind of predetermined what might be valuable to that community in that context. So it's not cookie cutter. The catalogs and the content are going to be dependent on the local library in that region, what they already subscribe to. And then those community-based organizations that we partner with, they will also have a hand in our population really needs to learn about nutrition and diabetes mitigation, or our population really needs to learn about financial literacy and basic accounting and financial well-being, et cetera. That's kind of how that platform works. And it looks very different in lots of different places.
So would it be fair to say, and I appreciate that it's not a cookie cutter model, because obviously there are so many programs, and it's much easier to run a program when you've got, here's what we do, here's how we do it, and this is what it looks like, A, B, C, D. It's the same for everybody. But that's obviously not what you guys are doing. But that's the whole intention of the program, is to make sure that you're servicing the individual based on the individual's needs.
Yes. So we rely on this kind of core basic tech platform as a tool for getting to have somewhat of a starting point and a template, but we absolutely customize it depending on the community, their needs, and the realities in that place. So we sort of like to think about all this work as hyper-local at scale. Each one of these is going to look a little bit different because it has to be local. You cannot hand a tool to people and expect it to mean the same thing if you're talking about rural Maine versus Oakland, California, right? The realities are just completely different. The economic context is different. Language groups are different. The weather's different, right? The economic engines, the things that happen in that place. Are you dealing with inland populations? Are you dealing with coastal and maritime related industries, et cetera? So we know that there is utility to having a starting point, which is this kind of templatized platform. But then I mentioned earlier that we have these three ways that the work comes to life, right? Research, consulting, and then the platform. Well, the consulting piece is where we basically come in to customize. We make it real for that context. And that's where the relationships need to be built. And that's where we tend to have engagements over time with folks that then utilize the platform.
So is it fair to say that you guys are something of a conduit between the student and the educational experience?
Yeah, I think we are a conduit in the sense that we're essentially unlocking, making visible and accessible the route and the pathway to learning. We don't create new learning content ourselves. I have a background in curriculum design. In one of my consulting relationships, I do write and deliver a curriculum. That's separate. When we're talking about using the platform, however, we are basically the lock keepers in a canal system. We're trying to, open up the locks in between the system, the parts of the system, and like making sure that a person can get from this to that without much friction.
Yeah, that they have access. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So, Phalana, what's the exact student journey? Like, let's say I'm interested in becoming a part of Bendable Labs. What's the whole journey from Alpha to Omega, and what does that look like?
So I'm not sure the question really applies to us. We wouldn't necessarily see a single student journey as the outcome of our work. I can give you a few examples of how people who are utilizing the platform, and you may call those folks students, what their lives look like. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about the other part of my portfolio, which I'm really excited about, which is where I actually get to work directly with classroom instructors in more traditional classroom settings. So I'll save that for just a moment. But when we think about the people who are using the platform, there are examples like in Tennessee right now, we're working with one of the sort of regional library system near and around Memphis, and working with the state librarian of Tennessee to create a program. It's called Leg Up, as in like, got to get leg up in the world. And essentially, we provide patrons in that area the opportunity to complete 16 hours of learning in very set learning pathways. And those learning pathways are determined by the labor market statistics that are real-time current statistics for that region, to help people be able to then earn a little digital micro-credential that's validated by the state library that signals them as ready for entry-level jobs in any one of those learning pathways that they've selected. The idea being that you're essentially working in concert and partnership with workforce development efforts to utilize free learning resources, again, from the public library system, but getting them in the hands of people who maybe don't have their own laptop. Maybe they don't have a way to access the internet except at the public library. Maybe they're either underemployed, unemployed, otherwise out of the workforce for whatever reason, and just need a sort of jumpstart to get them to where they can indicate to a hiring manager that they're resilient enough to do 16 hours of independent learning that can be validated, and they will show up and do the job. One of the ways that we arrived at designing this program actually came from a pilot that we ran in Carlsbad in Southern California, where we initially imagined that this kind of program would be specifically aimed at satisfying the needs of those job seekers. And so we ran that pilot. We had a great experience and a great learning opportunity through that. And then it became really clear that one of the other important stakeholders in this whole effort that we hadn't necessarily centered when we started, but we learned from the reality of trying it, is the hiring manager. That all too often, hiring managers, who are, especially when they're trying to fill entry-level jobs, they put up a posting, they get slammed with tons and tons of applications. They may find some people who seem suitable. They bring those folks in. And then there's a real quick drop off, especially for people who are out of practice with being employed. They're like happy to show up for that first interview, but then they don't show up on the first day, or they show up for the first day and they're gone by lunchtime because they got nervous and things were scary or unfamiliar or whatever the issue might be. So that all too often entry level jobs have a kind of revolving door experience for hiring managers. They're constantly having to hire for the same positions over and over and over again. And that perhaps one of the things that we were actually inadvertently solving for was just that. Those hiring managers could now get a signal when we were working in Carlsbad, and now the same thing's happening in Tennessee. They can get a signal that this particular individual is actually a pretty good bet. They took themselves through totally self-directed learning. They stuck it out. We have ways of monitoring the completion rates and their actual intake of the content. And then we know, all right, if this person was willing to do whatever they needed to do to get these 16 hours completed on their own, they're probably not going to just disappear and ghost the job on day one. Right. And so in some ways, it was an important lesson for us to kind of obviously it'd be a good thing for the job seeker. But now we also know that there's this other need that we're solving on the other end with the hiring managers. So that's one type of quote unquote student. So that's one way that someone's life intersects with the Bendable platform. Another instance is the Northern Illinois Food Bank. So this is an organization that's specifically centered on making sure people who are facing food insecurity can access food with consistency. But then the question, obviously, if you think in terms of systems and systems change, the question is obviously why are so many people facing food insecurity? Okay, well, do we have employment or employability issues? Are there other things, externally driving this outcome that's observable in our community? What could that be? And how might we start to mitigate and respond to that? Well, the Northern Illinois Food Bank has its own workforce development efforts, right? Because they want to help people get employable so that they perhaps can mitigate the insecurity around nutrition and can actually be employed and have ways to earn and then acquire food through their own means. That kind of shift in their aperture and widening the lens for themselves then allowed for us to be a potential partner with them. And so we are, where they can say, okay, one of the ways that we will help people become ready to work is using this digital platform. They had their workforce efforts in place before we joined in to help and support that work. So they have other ways that they're doing that. But this is just an additional tool that they can rely on and offer to that constituency who someone might have just come there because they needed food. But now they're getting the opportunity to get a little bit of workplace readiness through the food bank. So that's, again, a very different kind of student. And I think those are kind of my two favorite examples.
And I was going to ask you if you have other partnerships like that set up, because I could see that would be a really beneficial way to get this kind of support and this program just out to other people who are, as you said, they're actually going for one service and then coming away with an additional opportunity there.
Yeah. I mean, the other examples are kind of small and different, and they may be ones, for example, where we're partnered with parent centers. I mentioned those earlier. A lot of folks who live in Southern California might be familiar with how a lot of LAUSD schools, for example, have a parent center on site. And I know from when I taught, I was a high school teacher many years ago, our parent center was a space for parents to come in. And obviously their first priorities were things like how to help my kid adjust to this new school, or how to help my kid prepare for college, or, my kid is really struggling with their behavior and I'm really busy as a parent. I have to work. Can you all help me figure out a parenting plan that will improve our communication and my kid's attitude? So that might be their initial approach to that parenting center. But very quickly, I observed, and it became true, and I've observed since in lots of other school settings in this area, where for those parents, that parent center is often one of the few really safe and trusted spaces for them, where they know that I can go there and no one's necessarily going to judge me. It's not the public assistance office. It's not the truant officer's office down at the local PD. It's this other thing that's related to my kid. And I know those adults in that building care about my kid, and they care about my family, and they care about my community. So they would go seeking things like, hey, can you help me update my resume? Or can you help me read this letter? I'm still struggling with my English language acquisition. And so I don't know everything that's in this letter that came from my landlord. Can you help me understand what this is? And you started to notice that the parent center actually starts to serve as this kind of wraparound experience for a lot of parents, right? And so that's another setting where you realize like, oh, we're not just talking about the kid and math or their behavior or their attendance. We're talking about this other thing that supports a family. And we know that when the family does well, the kid does better in school. So we can't ignore the fact that the parents are actually asking us and inviting us in to be helpful to them and their well-being as parents and as community members. So why not start to think of ourselves a little bit more holistically? And so that might be another setting where those parents become quote unquote students that are utilizing Bendable in this other way, because it's already been demonstrated that they come to that parent center with these kinds of needs and questions.
And again, it's just providing a resource for people and put in touch with literal libraries of information, right?
Yes, indeed.
Exactly, right? Which is such an interesting thought. It's kind of almost like, it is a terrible analogy, but it's almost like an actual personal internet, right? Or it's like internet come to life almost, right? It's like a real live interactive knowledge base.
And then they can customize. So when I say it's like Netflix or Spotify for learning resources, people, it's a great shorthand way to talk about it, because it's literally what you're saying.
Yeah.
It comes to life. You can make it your own. You take those massive alpha order databases that we talked about earlier, and you then make a place that's yours. I really like this kind of learning. I want to do this. I don't want long form. I want short form, et cetera, et cetera. And then when they go into their Bendable account, what's there is only what they actually want. They can still search and access all those other massive repositories, but they can create this little space that's, here's my learning, my resources.
Is there a cost associated with this at all?
Not for participants and not for the end users. And that's how we've always wanted to do this. I mentioned when we first kicked off here that we're a social purpose corporation. So we function in the private sector like a corporation, but our orientation is certainly not just about shareholder value. We're really interested in operating a little bit more like a nonprofit, but with for-profit status. So we are really committed to making sure that the people, the end users who are coming to these resources are accessing them for free, because they are free from the library, right? We can't just say like, oh, we're going to take these free resources and now you got to pay us.
Sure.
No.
Well, but you're providing it like this amalgamated,
we are
consolidated.
Absolutely, of course. But that's where the partnerships come in, right? And so that's where we work with other entities to say to them, hey, these folks that you're serving or these folks that you want to help be employed, you can provide this resource to them. So they pay us, not the end users.
It does sound like a really unique kind of niche that you all kind of carved out there.
Yeah.
And especially in this very digital age, I think people are looking for different kinds of experiences that more harken back to pre-digital age, and a way by which to engage with content and learn things in a way that might be more lined up with who they are as people or learners or how they want to experience things.
We won a Bronze Anthem Award last year. And one of the things that we highlighted in our application is that we actually see technology as all about connecting not just people to technology, but people to people using technology, right?
Sure.
Because learning is inherently social. Like there's plenty of science over many decades that tells us for sure learning is social. So entirely depending on just digital for learning is not necessarily going to create sticky learning for anybody, a community, an individual, et cetera. And so we are really committed to the both and can create community in the real world and in real life and real opportunity, real jobs, real growth. But you can use this technology to get people there. And especially when folks are either in really underserved communities or maybe it's just geography that's the challenge. You're in outer, deep rural parts of Alaska or northeast Arizona, and maybe there's just like the inability to physically get somewhere. This is where tech is really powerful. And so we have the sense that it's a tool within how you can, yes, harken back to old school in-person experiences and learning.
There's a middle road there that we're still all trying to discover, I think, given like this crazy integration of technology, especially with AI. I mean, we are at the very, very early stages of AI integration with human beings, right?
Yes.
2 years ago, I told my Gen Z and millennial staff what they thought of ChatGPT, and no one had heard of it. I'll never forget that conversation. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the cool one here.
I'm the cool guy.
And I'm the one who's informed. Yep. And literally I think it was 2.5 years ago because it was just coming out of our holiday break there. And I had just heard about, I think OpenAI had just launched ChatGPT for public use. And now that's just totally ubiquitous. Everybody uses it. We're completely saturated with it. So we're still trying to find this middle path between technological integration and that complete and total, like what's becoming saturation versus this still humanistic centered approach. And because we're human beings in the ways that we traditionally always have been in most instances. So you've got to, again, harken back to that nature while integrating the new capacities that are here to stay, obviously.
You know, there's a massive universe of tasks and needs and problems in the world that can't be solved through digital means, right? They need human hands on them and human eyes on them. And so these things are not irrelevant, even though AI and such is growing.
You could have a conversation with AI and you can learn a lot. You can learn a ton from it. However, at least for me, and maybe because I'm still like have one foot entrenched in the old schoolness, but like at least for me, there's something, I don't know, it's ineffable. It's some sort of indescribable spark that happens when you actually are interacting with someone. I mean, in any case, of course, it's going to be different, just normal human interactions. But what I'm trying to point to here is when I'm in like a learning kind of situation or some sort of environment where I'm either trying to disseminate information or information is trying to be downloaded onto me by someone else, there's something different that happens when it's occurring between myself and another individual, as opposed to when it's occurring between myself and something I'm,
and yourself and yourself or yourself and that material.
But I mean that could be said that even 50 years ago when people just had access to information through libraries or encyclopedias or whatnot. With text, with information that was in some way is now coming to you from a second party through a medium, then you have to have your own comprehension of it. And then, your own biases and your own limited understanding can kind of get in the way and yada, yada. So where AI can kind of help you through some of those latter things, but there's something that, again, happens very organically when we have just these head-to-head conversations with other people, right, in a learning situation.
And this is exactly why we say that learning is inherently social. That's where you get the distinction between information and knowledge, or the distinction between information and wisdom. If you're just like consuming information, but there's no chewing, testing, sharing with other people, you're not necessarily going to move beyond the information state. You're going to probably remain static in some comprehension that isn't really about knowledge or wisdom. So I think both and all day long.
We'll have more of our conversation with Phalana Tiller on the next episode of Educate Everyone. And now the Middle Tree Minute.
This is Kristen Hernandez, Middle Tree's executive assistant. Kids thrive on routine, especially when school demands start to pile up. Sit down together once a week and map out when homework, studying, and free time will happen. This doesn't mean every minute is scheduled, it just creates predictability. When kids start knowing what's coming, they feel more in control and less anxious. A weekly routine turns chaos into calm and helps learning feel manageable. And that's the Middle Tree Minute.
And now a quick look into Dr. Atman's book, A Philosophical War. Last time, Joe, we were talking about how a different conscious experience might change how we actually experience the real and physical world. Can you go a little more on that?
And it seems like an obvious thing to say, and I feel like I start off so many of these segments sort of saying that, and yet at the same time, it's not something that we really look at frequently. I think the easiest way to say it is the kind of consciousness that we have determines the kind of experience that we have. It's something that I've said here a number of times there. The implications of that are so far-reaching in that the kind of consciousness that we have doesn't just determine the kind of metaphysical experiences that we have, it determines the kind of physical experiences that we have as well. And what we had said last time, and it's a question that I'm posed in the last time we did a segment on this, and it's something that is posed throughout the book, and will continue to be something that we bring up, is that are we giving primacy to the wrong, because we tend to look at everything in this linear time that is determined by physical reality. And a big contention, and it's a big actual theme of the book, is that depending on the kind of consciousness that a being has, any kind of being, an amoeba, a giraffe, like referenced last time, or even just human beings within their own selves, in a way, two people can be sitting on a long flight, and one could be totally enraptured in a book or in a movie or whatever, and the flight goes by really quickly, and one person is just bored out of their mind, or we've all been, on the flight with the kicking, screaming child in back of us or whatever. The same kind of being, we're all human beings, and yet we experience the same physical happening in very different ways. So my question, and again, kind of throughout A Philosophical War, is what does our experience with the physical nature of reality actually look like with a different kind of consciousness altogether? And we could try and study this and maybe do some laboratory experiments on, things, or the best way to actually even test it would be through the famous thought experiments, not one particular that is famous per se, but this is where thought experiments themselves become a kind of interesting and almost the only sort of access that we might have to thinking about something like this, because there's no real way for us, obviously, to get in a time machine and go back 500,000 years ago or however old the first modern human being came on the scene. So we have to kind of try and figure out where we are now within our consciousness and how we take in phenomena. And again, we're currently tuned towards the physical world, right? We're currently tuned towards this reactive sort of mode by which we observe the physical world and then react to that and then put something back out into that physical world. It sounds to me like almost uncomfortably like new agey, which this book stays away from it entirely. And yet at the same time, in this sort of mystical kind of overarching sort of landscape or ontological approach, I think we need to think about and try and figure out what our experience with the physical world would be if our consciousness wasn't attuned towards only reacting to that which is on that physical realm outside of us. Because what is physical really is an otherness, that which is exterior, other than that individual person that we are. And again, we're sort of always operating from the center of our own universe, and the physical world kind of appears in all ways and directions around us. And we're trained from a very early age to give primacy to the physical world. The physical world is the master, we are the slave. I wonder if that was always how human beings looked at the world. And I wonder if that's even exactly how other forms of being, conscious or otherwise, see the world itself. So that's something to think about and explore. And it's a really deep kind of question. It's a really difficult question to grapple with. But again, to get where we want to go within a philosophical war, it's one that we ask and give some credence to.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middletree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.